So these are the solutions for the Unit 6 Personal Check Part 2. We have two free response questions here. The first one says, an array of string object words was properly declared, initialized, and each element of words contains a string consisting of only lowercase letters. So in this problem, they're telling you right here, you're not going to have to worry about capitalization or switching back and forth between the cases. Write a code segment that uses an enhanced for loop. Okay, that's going to be kind of important. An enhanced for loop to print all the elements of words that end with the letters ing. As an example, if your words array contained the words 10, fading, post, card, thunder, hinge, trailing, and batting, then the following output should be produced by the code segment. Just the words fading, trailing, and batting. These are the ones that end with ing. Tricky thing, hinge actually has ing in it, but it's not ending with ing. So we've got to be very careful. It's not just looking for ing all in a row. It's got to be the last bunch of letters. So this problem says to write the code segment as described above and to reminding you again once more that you must use an enhanced for loop. Okay, let's take a look at the solutions. The very first thing that I want to point out is how to do an enhanced for loop. So you start off with the word for, and then you have to create a variable that's going to mimic the type of variable that your array has in it. So since words is the name of my array, and it is comprised of string type variables, I'm going to create a string type variable called str, and then a colon, and then the name of your array. This is how you begin an enhanced for loop. Now what the enhanced for loop is going to do, one at a time, it's going to extract whatever is at element 0 and temporarily store it as str, which is a string type variable. And then when we're done with this loop, it's going to come back and extract the next value in the words array and put it in str and so on. What is it that we're looking for with these str string type variables that we'll be extracting out of our words array? Well, the most important thing that you want to understand is we're looking at the last three letters. So what I want to do here is I want to create a substring starting with str.length minus 3. So if my string has, for example, 10 letters in it, we want to start at index number 7. And so basically we're going to be looking at index 789. So if str.substring str.length minus 3 dot equals ing. Now you might wonder here, you might say, well, what about using equals ignore case? You could, but we don't have to because they told us this problem would all be lowercase letters, so we don't have to worry about case sensitivity here. So anyways, if we do find a match between the last three letters in our substring and it matching up with the letters ing, we are to print out whatever that word is. So system.println str. And so this will then systematically go through all the words, checking to see if the last three letters are ing. So free response question number 2 says that employees at a store are paid daily wages according to the following rules. Each employee is paid the same fixed amount per day. Each employee is paid an additional amount for each item they sold on that day. And then there's a daily bonus. If the number of items sold that day by an employee is greater than a computed threshold, then the employee also receives a bonus equal to 10% of the employee's daily wage. So then you would raise their whatever they earned that day by 10% overall. So in this problem, you're going to have to write two methods from this payroll class that they've started. So let's just look at the class, what they already have, and then we'll talk about what are the parts we're going to have to figure out. So the payroll class has a private int type array called items sold. This is going to store all the items sold by each employee. Then there's a private double type array called wages, which is going to compute the wages for each employee. Public double compute bonus threshold is what you're going to have to write the code for in part A. And that returns the bonus threshold as described in part A. So we haven't actually read what part A is yet, but when we get to that, That's one of the codes we're going to have to write. And then the second thing that we're going to have to write is public void compute wages, where they send me in a variable called fixed wage, which I'm assuming is the employee's fixed amount per day. And they're also going to send in the double per item wage. So that's how much additional we pay the employee for each item they sold. And they will talk about how to implement this in Part B. So we'll write one code for Part A and one code for Part B. You can read some of the preconditions up here for Part B. It says it computes the employee's wage as described in Part B and stores them in wages. So wages is your double type array. The parameter fixed wage represents the fixed amount for each employee paid per day. The parameter per item wage represents the amount that each employee is paid per item sold. So here's the description for Part A. They said the bonus threshold is calculated by based on the number of items sold by all the employees on a given day. The employee with the greatest number of sales and the employee with the least number of sales on that day are ignored in the calculation. The average number of items sold by the remaining employees on that day is computed, and this value is used as the bonus threshold. So now they're going to give you an example. For example, on a given day, let's say that the items sold array, which keeps track of a bunch of integers of how many items each employee sold, looks like this. So we've got employee 0 selling 48 items, employee 1 selling 50 items, employee 2 selling 37, et cetera, et cetera. So what we want to do here, if we listen carefully to the way they want us to calculate this threshold, is they want us to come up with an average, but they want us to get rid of the person who sold the lowest amount and the person who sold the highest amount in the calculation. So if you, first of all, just take a look at the number of indices here, 0 through 9 means that there's 10 employees. And when I go through here, I find that the person who sold the least amount of items was 37, and the person who sold the most amount of items was 70. So when I go to do my calculation, I want to basically add up all the employees' amounts of items sold, and you can see that they're actually adding all 10 of them together, but then they subtract out the person who sold the least, which was 37, and the person who sold the most, which was 70. And then instead of dividing by 10, because we've taken these two numbers out of the calculation, we're actually only dividing by 8. So very oftentimes it helps to go through one of these calculations by hand so that you'll notice what you have to mimic with your coding. So we're going to have to find the lowest and the highest and take them out of the sum and then divide by the number of employees minus 2. Okay, let's take a look at our solution. So in this solution, you're going to see me using two algorithms that are very, very common things that they would ask you to do with arrays. So the name of the method is public double compute bonus threshold. And I'm going to set up 3 integer variables here. One of them I'm going to call total, and that's basically going to keep track of the total sum of all the amount of items that were sold. And I'm going to have an integer for the min value, and I'm going to have an integer for the max value. Now notice that all of these are initially set to the first amount of items sold, the ones that were at index 0. So in our previous example, I think that was 48. So this would take on 48 as all these values. Now I'm going to set up a for loop and check this out. Since we've already included the first item at index 0 in here, I'm actually going to start my looping index out at 1 because we've already taken care of 0. And we're going to go from 1 up to I less than items sold.length, incrementing by 1s. We're going to do 3 things inside of this loop. This line of code right here is going to be keeping track of our total amount of items sold. That's like all the employees' amount of items sold combined all together. So looping through 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So this is a accumulator variable that's keeping track of that. And then the other 2 parts of this inside of the loop, these if statements here, are going to be looking for the new minimum value and the new maximum value. So if the item sold at index I is less than min, then item sold at index I becomes the min. if items sold at index I is greater than max, then items sold at index I becomes the max. So by the time we go through this loop and we've incremented through all the different possible values for I, at the end of this for loop, I will be storing the proper min and max values. Now, how do we compute the bonus threshold? Well, we take that total, which represents the sum of all the items. We take out the min value, we take out the max value, and then we divide by items sold dot length minus 2. So the number of employees, well, minus 2 because we're taking out 2 of the employees' sales. There's another thing that I want you to notice here, and it's right here. Hopefully everybody recognizes what that is right there. That is typecasting. Now you might say, well, why do I need to do typecasting? Well, this numerator is going to be an integer. It's made up of only integers. And this denominator, of course, is going to be an integer, because the length is going to be an integer, and then you're subtracting 2, and that's going to be an integer. If you divide an integer by an integer, it will truncate any decimals. We need to tell Java that we are expecting to do it with a double. You can see the return type here is double precision. So by typecasting either your numerator or your denominator or the entire calculation. Now the example that they're showing here is they're actually typecasting the denominator, but you really just need one of these parts to be typecast as a double, or you could typecast the whole thing out in front. So part B for this problem wants us to write the compute wages method. And the compute wages method is intended to calculate the wage for each employee and assign them to the appropriate element in the array wages. These are going to be doubles, so they can have decimals. For example, wages 3 should be assigned for the wages for the third employee. An employer's wage consists of their daily wages plus a possible bonus and are calculated as follows. So this is what they had described before. Each employee's wage are equal to the fixed wage plus the number of items sold times the amount paid per item sold. And if the employee sold more than the bonus threshold, then the employee is entitled to another 10% added on to their overall wage. Remember, these were the example numbers that they had given us for part A. And remember that that had computed a bonus threshold of 51.75. That was to us in the previous example. So they say, suppose that fixed wage is $10 and the per item amount is $1.5 per item. They want to show you a couple of examples of how this calculation should go. So employee 0, who actually only sold 48 items, was less than the bonus threshold. So employee 0's wage is going to be simple to calculate. All you have to do is take the fixed wage, which was 10, and then you're going to add on the wage per item bonus, the wage per item, which was 1.5, times the number of items they sold, which was 48. Now, when you work out the math for this, 1.5 times 48 added with 10 makes 82. So their wage was $82. And that would be assigned to wages 0, because that goes with employee 0. Employee 9, who sold 60 items, which is more than the bonus threshold, would additionally receive a 10% bonus on top of everything else that they've earned. So we would do the same kind of calculation that we did for employee 0. We would take their fixed wage of 10 and the 1.5 times the number of items they sold, in this case, which is 60. But because they were above the bonus threshold, we multiplied their entire wage by 1.1. And then we would assign that into wages at the 9th index for that employee. This is the way they want you to calculate the wages for each particular employee, and we got to go through this entire array and do it for each employee one at a time. Now, the coding for this is not actually very difficult, but it takes a very long time just to read the question and understand what they want. So remember, the method that they want us to write starts off like this: public void compute wages, and they're passing us in 2 parameters, a double for fixed wage and a double for per item wage. The 10 and the 1.5 was just an example, so it's not necessarily going to be 10 and 1.5. You have to use these numbers in your calculations. And something else that I want to point out that's very, very common in the AP exam is very oftentimes like a Part B question will ask you to use something that you did in Part A. So one of the very first things I have to do in my compute wages method is I have to figure out where that bonus threshold is. So double threshold equals compute bonus threshold. This is actually making a call to the method that we just wrote in Part A. So we're using Part A as part of our coding for Part B. That happens a lot. Do not be surprised if that happens to you on the actual exam. Now I've got to set up a for loop, and I want it to start from index 0, go all the way up to items sold.length, and we're going to have a variable called double base wage, which is going to be equal to your fixed wage plus the per item wage times the number of items sold for that particular employee. So items sold at the ith index will bring back the number of items that particular employee sold. Everybody gets at least the base wage. Now, if the items sold for this particular employee at the ith index is greater than the threshold, we will multiply their base wages times 1.1, as the example showed. Else, if they didn't exceed the threshold, then the wages at the ith location will just be the base wage. So the actual coding for this is not very hard, but you just have to sort through all the stuff that they talk about in the question set. And that's the end of this Unit 6 personal check.